Ashley didn't even lower her voice when she said it. "You don't really do anything here anymore, Julie. Honestly, you're kind of useless in this house." The words landed in the middle of my own kitchen, the same kitchen my husband and I had spent 35 years paying for repairing and filling with family dinners. My son sat at the table staring down at his phone, like the wood grain was suddenly fascinating. And my daughter-in-law, she walked right past the wall behind me without noticing the one thing that would eventually destroy every assumption she had about this house, a framed document, hanging there the entire time. If she had read it, this story might have ended very differently. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. What city, or even what country, and what time is it there right now? Stories like this remind us that family struggles happen everywhere. If you've ever stayed silent while someone mistook your kindness for weakness, tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy real stories about family truth and the moments when life turns unexpectedly, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because what Ashley said that day wasn't the worst part, not even close. When people hear what happened in my house, they usually imagine that the tension appeared overnight, that Ashley walked in one day, said something cruel, and everything fell apart immediately. But the truth is never that simple. The truth is that homes like families don't crack all at once. They crack slowly in quiet ways with small sounds you try not to hear. My name is Julie Nguyen. I'm 68 years old, and the house where all of this happened sits in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside San Jose, California. It's a modest 2-story home with a small front yard and a persimmon tree my husband planted when our son was 8 years old. For 35 years, that house was the center of my life. My husband, Thomas Nguyen, and I bought it in 1989. Back then, the neighborhood looked very different, fewer houses, more open land, and almost every family seemed to know one another. Thomas had just been promoted at the engineering firm where he worked, and we finally felt like we could afford something stable for our son. I still remember the day we first walked through the front door. The floors were scratched, the kitchen cabinets were outdated, the backyard was mostly dry dirt. But Thomas stood in the living room with his hands on his hips and smiled like he was already imagining everything it could become. "This one," he said. That was Thomas. Quiet confidence. He rarely rushed decisions, but when he made one, he stood by it. Over the years, we repaired that house piece by piece. New floors, a rebuilt kitchen, fresh paint every few years. Not expensive luxury renovations, just steady improvements made by 2 people who believed in building something that would last. Michael grew up in that house. He learned to ride his bike on the sidewalk in front. He studied for exams at the dining room table while I cooked dinner. He celebrated birthdays in the backyard with friends running through the sprinklers in the summer heat. For most of his childhood, Michael was a gentle boy. Curious, kind, sometimes stubborn, but never cruel. Thomas used to say Michael had a soft heart, and maybe that was true. After high school, Michael went to college in Southern California. He studied business, moved around a few times, and eventually landed a sales job in the tech industry. The money was good, especially when the commissions were strong. That was around the time he met Ashley. Ashley was confident from the moment I first met her, polished, well-spoken, very aware of appearances. She worked in marketing and seemed to know exactly how she wanted her life to look. I remember thinking she and Michael were very different people. But young love often ignores differences that older eyes can see clearly. They married 4 years later. At first, everything seemed fine. They bought a newer house in a modern development about 40 minutes away from me. Ashley loved posting photos of their life online, new furniture vacations, dinners at restaurants with carefully plated meals. When Lily was born 11 years ago, I thought their lives had settled into something stable. But stability can be fragile when it's built on pressure. About 2 years ago, I started noticing small changes when I visited them. Michael looked tired more often. Ashley talked frequently about expenses, private school tuition, property taxes, car payments, renovations they wanted to do. Their house was beautiful, but maintaining that lifestyle seemed to require constant motion. Sales jobs, especially in tech, can feel like riding a roller coaster. One quarter, everything is strong. The next quarter, the market shifts. Then commissions shrink. Michael didn't tell me everything at the time, but I learned later that his income had dropped significantly for almost a year. At the same time, several credit cards were carrying balances, and their mortgage payments had become harder to manage. Ashley hated the idea of downsizing. To her, appearances mattered too much. So instead of moving somewhere smaller, they tried to hold everything together with short-term solutions: loans, refinancing, more credit. Eventually, the pressure reached a breaking point. One evening, about 11 months before the moment Ashley called me useless in my own kitchen, Michael asked if he could come by to talk. When he arrived, he looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. We sat at the dining table, the same table where he used to do homework as a boy. "Mom," he said quietly, "Ashley and I are in a little bit of a difficult spot right now." Those words, "a little bit of a difficult spot," are usually the first sign that the problem is much bigger than the sentence suggests. He explained that his income had dropped and they were trying to reorganize their finances. The house payment was becoming difficult and they needed time to recover. Ashley had an idea, he said. They could stay with me temporarily, just a few months, 6 at the most. "Mom, it would really help us stabilize things," Michael said, "just until everything gets back on track." I didn't hesitate. A mother rarely does. "Of course," I told him. "This house has plenty of space." When Ashley heard that I had agreed, she sounded relieved. She thanked me several times and said it would only be for a short while. Lily was excited about the idea of staying with Grandma. At the time, I truly believed I was helping my family through a temporary storm. Looking back now, I realized something important. The day they moved into my house, I believed I was opening my door to family. Ashley, however, seemed to believe she was stepping into an opportunity. The first week was calm enough. Boxes filled the living room. Furniture from their house arrived in a moving truck. Lily ran through the hallway, exploring every corner again like she had when she was younger. I tried to make everything comfortable, but even in those early days, small things started shifting in ways I didn't fully understand yet. Ashley walked through each room, slowly studying the layout with careful eyes. Not the way a guest studies a place, more like someone evaluating property. "This house has really good bones," she said one afternoon while standing in the living room. Then she added something that sounded harmless at the time. "With the right updates, it could be worth a lot." I smiled politely. At that moment, I thought she was simply making conversation. I didn't yet realize she was already imagining a future where this house belonged to her and where I didn't quite fit anymore. If you had visited my house during those first few weeks after Michael and Ashley moved in, you might not have noticed anything unusual. Everything looked normal on the surface. There were more shoes by the front door, more voices in the evenings, Lily's laughter echoing through the hallway again. The guest bedroom was full of moving boxes that hadn't yet been unpacked. From the outside, it looked like a family helping each other through a temporary situation. But inside the house, the atmosphere began changing in small ways that were difficult to explain at first. Ashley started with the kitchen. That might sound like a small thing, but kitchens are the heart of many homes. They hold routines, habits, and memories. When someone changes a kitchen, they're often changing much more than furniture placement. One morning, I walked in to make tea and realized half the cabinets had been reorganized. My spice jars were gone from their usual shelf. The rice container had moved. Even the cups I had used every morning for years were no longer where they belonged. Ashley stood near the counter with her phone in her hand. "Oh, Julie," she said casually, "I hope you don't mind. I just reorganized things a little so the kitchen flows better." Flows better. That phrase would become very familiar in the months that followed. I looked at the cabinets for a moment before answering. "I've kept it that way for a long time," I said gently. Ashley smiled the way people do when they think they're being helpful. "Well, sometimes a fresh system makes life easier for everyone. Everyone." That word seemed innocent enough, but it carried a quiet assumption that the kitchen was now shared territory to redesign. I told myself not to overthink it. They were living here now. Adjustments were natural, but the adjustments didn't stop with the kitchen. Over the next few weeks, other things changed. Ashley moved furniture in the living room so that the couch faced a different direction. She replaced the tablecloth I had used for years with a new one she bought online. One afternoon, I noticed that several framed family photos had disappeared from the hallway. When I asked about them, Ashley said they were cluttering the wall and had been placed carefully in a box for safekeeping. Each change taken alone seemed small, but together they created a quiet feeling that the house was slowly becoming unfamiliar. Michael rarely commented on any of it. If anything, he seemed relieved whenever Ashley took control of organizing things. She just likes things structured, he told me once when I mentioned the kitchen. She's good at making spaces more efficient. I nodded. Efficiency is a pleasant word, but efficiency can sometimes mean removing things that someone else values. The first moment that truly unsettled me happened about 3 weeks after they moved in. I came downstairs early in the morning, planning to make coffee before anyone else woke up. But Ashley was already in the kitchen sitting at the table with her laptop open. She looked up when she heard me. "Good morning," she said. On the screen in front of her was a web page filled with photos of houses. Not just houses, real estate listings. I tried not to stare. Looking for something, I asked lightly. Ashley turned the laptop slightly toward herself. "Oh, just browsing," she said. "The market around here is actually really interesting." I poured my coffee and sat across from her. The page she had open showed a house 2 streets away from mine. It had sold recently. The price was high. Ashley tapped the screen thoughtfully. "Homes in this neighborhood have gone up a lot in value," she said, "especially ones with larger lots like yours." There was something about the way she said yours that felt calculated. Not rude, not aggressive, just analytical. Like someone studying numbers on an investment chart. I kept my voice neutral. "We bought this place a long time ago," I said, "back when prices were very different." Ashley nodded slowly. "That's exactly why it's such an incredible asset." Asset. Another interesting word. Most people describe their homes with emotional language. Ashley described mine with financial language. Before I could respond, Lily ran into the kitchen still wearing her pajamas. "Grandma," she said, throwing her arms around me. Moments like that made everything feel simple again. Children have a way of restoring normalcy, but even Lily began noticing things over time. One evening, she came into the living room where I was folding laundry. "Grandma," she asked quietly, "why does Mom keep measuring the walls?" I paused. "Measuring the walls?" She nodded. "She has a tape measure and writes numbers on her phone." I tried to smile. "She probably just wants to hang something new." Lily accepted that explanation easily. But the next day, I saw Ashley doing exactly what Lily described. She stood in the dining room with a tape measure stretched across one wall. When she noticed me watching, she smiled. "Just checking something," she said. "What kind of something?" I asked. "Oh, nothing important," she replied quickly. Then she changed the subject. Michael still avoided every uncomfortable conversation. Whenever Ashley suggested new changes, repainting the hallway, replacing certain fixtures, removing older furniture, he simply shrugged. If it makes the house nicer, why not? But there was one place Ashley never touched, one wall she never reorganized, one item she never removed, the wall behind the staircase. That wall held a single framed document. It had hung there for years. Most people assumed it was decorative, a certificate, some kind of commemorative paper. Ashley walked past it dozens of times every week, but she never stopped to read it. And that small detail, something so ordinary, so easy to overlook, would eventually change everything that happened in this house. Because while Ashley was busy reorganizing cabinets and measuring walls, she never noticed the one thing that quietly proved this house would never belong to her. By the second month of Michael and Ashley living in my house, the small changes had stopped feeling temporary. They had become habits. Ashley moved through the house with a quiet confidence that made it seem as if she had always belonged there. She woke early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through emails like someone managing a property rather than living in someone else's home. At first, I told myself this was simply her personality. Some people need to feel organized in order to feel comfortable, but comfort can slowly turn into authority if no one pushes back. And I didn't push back. Not yet. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw a sheet of paper taped to the refrigerator. It had a list of bullet points written in Ashley's neat handwriting, house guidelines. I stood there for a moment reading them. Laundry days, Tuesday and Saturday. Kitchen cleaning rotation. Grocery tracking sheet. Quiet hours after 10 p.m. Utility usage reminders. Ashley turned from the sink when she noticed me looking. "Oh, good you saw it," she said brightly. "I thought it would help everyone stay organized." Everyone. There was that word again. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Are these necessary?" I asked. Ashley shrugged lightly. "It just keeps things running smoothly. When multiple people live in a house, structure helps." Structure, another word that sounded harmless. But I had lived in that house for decades without needing permission to do my laundry. Michael walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, tying his shoelaces as he headed for work. "Hey, Mom," he said quickly. I gestured toward the paper. "Did you see this?" Michael glanced at it briefly. "Oh yeah," he said. "Ashley just likes systems. It's fine." He grabbed his keys and left before I could say anything else. Ashley smiled politely as if the conversation had been settled. I didn't remove the paper. Instead, I made tea and sat quietly at the table, wondering when my home had begun feeling like someone else's workplace. The next sign came a week later. Ashley had started inviting people over. At first, it was just friends, women she knew from work or social groups. They would sit in the living room drinking coffee and discussing their lives while Lily played upstairs. I didn't mind guests, but something about their conversations caught my attention. Ashley often spoke about the house as if she were describing a renovation project. "The layout is actually great," she said one afternoon, while gesturing around the living room. "With some updates, it could be incredible." Her friend looked around thoughtfully. "You could open that wall into the kitchen," she suggested. Ashley nodded. "Exactly. And the backyard has enough space for a deck." I sat quietly on the couch, pretending to read a magazine. They spoke as if I wasn't there, or perhaps as if my presence was temporary. Eventually, the conversation turned toward property values. Ashley mentioned the price of homes in the neighborhood again. She talked about resale potential. She even mentioned something that made my stomach tighten. "If we owned this place outright," she said casually, "we could probably refinance and invest in something bigger." Her friend nodded approvingly. "That would be smart. Own this place outright." I kept my eyes on the magazine in my hands, but inside something cold and uneasy began forming. Later that evening, I asked Michael about it while we were both in the kitchen. "What exactly are Ashley's plans for this house?" I asked. Michael looked confused. "What do you mean? She talks about renovations, resale, refinancing." Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "She's just thinking ahead," he said. "You know, Ashley, she likes planning." Planning what I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Just the future. The future." That word hung in the air between us, Michael. I said gently, "This house already has a future." He looked uncomfortable. "Mom, don't worry about it. Ashley's just brainstorming." Brainstorming. Another harmless word that meant very little when examined closely. I let the conversation drop, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. The most revealing moment happened a few days later. I had stepped outside to water the small garden near the front porch when I noticed a car parked across the street. A man stood on the sidewalk talking to Ashley. He was holding a clipboard. They were both looking at my house. Specifically, they were studying the roof line and the front windows. I walked closer. Ashley turned when she saw me approaching. "Oh, Julie," she said quickly. "This is Mark. He's a friend of mine." Mark smiled politely. "Nice to meet you." "What brings you here?" I asked. Ashley answered before he could. "Mark works in real estate," she explained. "He was just in the neighborhood, so I asked him to stop by and give me his opinion about something." "Opinion about what?" I asked. Ashley gestured toward the house. "Just the property value?" My grip tightened slightly on the watering can. "You asked a realtor to evaluate my house." Ashley laughed lightly. "Not evaluate, just estimate. It's always good to know the market." Mark shifted uncomfortably beside her. "I was actually just leaving," he said quickly. He shook my hand again and walked back toward his car. Ashley turned back to me with a cheerful expression. "You'd be surprised how much homes around here are selling for." I said nothing. She stepped closer. "This house could be worth a lot more than you realize." There it was again. Not your home, not your memories, just numbers, just value, just potential profit. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room long after everyone had gone to bed. The house was quiet. The hallway light illuminated the staircase wall, and there, exactly where it had hung for years, was the framed document. I walked over and stood in front of it. Most visitors assumed it was decorative, but I knew exactly what it was. Thomas had insisted on placing it there, right where everyone could see it. People rarely notice what's right in front of them, he told me once. At the time, I didn't fully understand why he said that. Now I was beginning to. Ashley had walked past that document hundreds of times since moving in. She had reorganized the kitchen, measured the walls, invited a realtor to examine the property, but she had never taken the time to read the one thing that quietly explained everything about this house. And as I stood there in the soft light of the hallway, I realized something important. Ashley wasn't just planning renovations. She was planning ownership. She believed this house was eventually going to become hers. What she didn't know yet was that my late husband had spent years making sure that could never happen. The longer Michael and Ashley lived in my house, the more I began to notice a pattern. Ashley didn't behave like someone who was temporarily staying with family. She behaved like someone who was gradually claiming territory. It wasn't loud or aggressive. In fact, most of the time it was wrapped in polite language and cheerful smiles. But the underlying message was always the same. This house was becoming hers. The change was so subtle at first that even I questioned whether I was imagining things. But then the conversation started. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard Ashley speaking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice carried through the hallway. "Yes, we're staying here for now," she said. A pause. Then she laughed softly. "Well, technically, it's my mother-in-law's house, but eventually it will be Michael's anyway." I stopped folding the towels. Eventually it will be Michael's anyway. That sentence lingered in my mind long after her call ended. She said it with such confidence, as if the future had already been decided, as if ownership was simply a matter of waiting. Later that evening, I asked Michael about it. We were standing in the backyard near the old persimmon tree Thomas planted decades ago. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. "Michael," I said carefully, "what have you and Ashley discussed about this house?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I heard Ashley say something earlier. I explained. "She mentioned that the house will eventually be yours." Michael sighed. "Mom, that's not what she meant." "Then what did she mean?" He hesitated before answering. "Well, you know, someday. Someday." Another vague word. "Michael," I said gently. "Your father and I built this house together." "I know," he replied quickly, "and we appreciate everything you've done." But his tone had changed. There was discomfort in it. Maybe even guilt. Ashley stepped onto the back patio before our conversation could go any further. "Dinner's ready," she called. Michael looked relieved by the interruption. We went inside. Dinner that night was unusually quiet. Ashley talked about Lily's school and an upcoming work project. Michael nodded along while scrolling through his phone between bites of food. I listened more than I spoke. Sometimes silence reveals more than questions do. Over the next few weeks, Ashley's comments about the house became more frequent. She talked about improvements. She talked about financial possibilities. She talked about the long-term potential of the property. Once, while we were cleaning the kitchen together, she said something that made me pause. "You know, Julie, this place could be amazing if it were modernized." I dried my hands slowly with a towel. "What kind of modernization?" I asked. Ashley began listing ideas as if she had been thinking about them for a long time. Removing certain walls, updating the flooring, expanding the kitchen, adding outdoor living space. She spoke with enthusiasm, almost like a real estate developer presenting a renovation plan. "People love open layouts now," she said. "This house has great bones, but it's stuck in an older style." Older style. That phrase carried an interesting weight. My life apparently had become part of that outdated design. "Your father built this kitchen himself," I said quietly. Ashley smiled politely. "I'm sure it was beautiful back then." Back then. The conversation ended there. But that night, while I was washing dishes, I remembered something Thomas once told me. It was during the final year of his life. His health had already begun declining, though he rarely complained about it. One evening, we were sitting together in the living room when he started talking about the house in a more serious way than usual. "Julie," he said, "we should make sure everything is properly protected." I laughed softly at the time. Protected from what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room slowly as if imagining a future we couldn't yet see. Not strangers, he said eventually. Strangers are easy to handle. Laws already deal with strangers. I frowned slightly. Then who? Thomas met my eyes. Entitlement, he said. I remember thinking the word sounded overly dramatic, but Thomas had always been a careful man. When he planned something, he planned it thoroughly. Over the next several months, he met with lawyers and accountants. He organized documents. He asked me to sign certain papers. I trusted him completely, so I didn't question the details too deeply. One afternoon, he returned from a meeting carrying a large envelope filled with legal documents. "This is important," he told me. "What is it?" I asked. "A structure," he said simply, "for the house." I remember laughing again. "You're treating this place like a bank vault." Thomas smiled faintly. Sometimes the things people fight over most are the things that feel safest. Then he walked over to the staircase wall. He hung one of the documents inside a frame, right where everyone entering the house could see it. "There," he said. "Anyone who pays attention will understand. At the time, I assumed it was simply a symbolic gesture, something legal and official that reflected his careful personality. After Thomas passed away, the framed document remained on that wall. Years went by. Visitors occasionally asked about it, but most people ignored it entirely, including Ashley. Back in the present, Ashley continued making plans for a future she seemed certain about. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a stack of printed papers. "I've been researching estate planning," she said casually. I looked at the documents. "What kind of planning?" Ashley tapped one page with her finger. "Well, situations like this can become complicated if paperwork isn't organized early." "What situation?" I asked. "You know," she replied lightly, "property transfers, ownership changes, inheritance. That word hung between us like a cloud slowly forming before a storm." Ashley leaned back in her chair. "It's actually easier if these things are arranged while everyone is still healthy." I met her gaze calmly. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Ashley smiled. "Oh, nothing urgent," she said, "just something we should talk about soon." Then she gathered the papers and left the room. I sat alone at the table for several minutes afterward. Ashley believed she was preparing for the future, but she had misunderstood something fundamental. The future she was planning for had already been carefully designed years ago by a man who trusted very few things more than preparation, my husband, Thomas Nguyen. And if Ashley had taken just a few seconds to read the framed document hanging on the staircase wall, she would have realized that every plan she was making was already impossible. The moment Ashley finally said it out loud didn't happen during an argument. It happened during dinner, which somehow made it worse. There were 4 of us sitting at the table that evening, Michael at the far end, Lily beside him, Ashley across from me, and me in the chair I had used for decades. The same chair where I had watched Michael grow up, the same chair Thomas once occupied every evening when he came home from work. The table looked full. Plates of rice, vegetables, grilled chicken, and soup filled the center. Lily had just finished telling a story about something funny that happened at school. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Ashley started talking about bills. "We really need to think about the utility costs here," she said while scrolling through something on her phone. Michael glanced up briefly. "What do you mean?" Ashley rotated the phone toward him. "These numbers are higher than they should be." Michael shrugged. "It's a house, Ash. Houses cost money." Ashley shook her head slightly. "It's not just that. There are ways to reduce unnecessary usage." Her eyes shifted toward me. Not aggressively, just deliberately. I set my spoon down slowly. "What kind of usage?" I asked. Ashley gave a small smile. "Well, for example, the washing machine runs almost every day." "I do laundry regularly," I said calmly. Ashley nodded. "Yes, but if we organize it more efficiently, we could reduce water consumption." Michael shifted slightly in his chair. "Mom's been doing things the same way for years," he said. Ashley tilted her head. "That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way." Lily looked between the 3 of us, sensing the tension but not understanding it. I felt something tightening inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. More like a quiet sadness. Ashley continued eating as if the conversation was completely reasonable. Then she said something that made the entire room fall silent. "You know," she said casually, "it's not really fair for Michael and me to carry most of the financial responsibility in this house." Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Ash," he muttered. But she continued. "I'm just being honest," she said. Her eyes settled directly on me now. "Julie, you don't really contribute to the household expenses anymore." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. "I'm sorry," I said. Ashley leaned back in her chair. "I'm just pointing out the reality of the situation." Michael stared at the table. Ashley's voice remained calm. "Michael and I are the ones working full-time. We're the ones paying for groceries, utilities, and everything else." That wasn't even entirely true, but I didn't interrupt. She continued speaking with the confident tone of someone delivering a logical conclusion. "So, from a practical perspective," she said, "you're not really doing much to support the household financially." I felt Lily's eyes on me. Children notice everything. I kept my voice steady. "This house is already paid for," I said quietly. Ashley shrugged. "That doesn't change the current costs of living here." Michael finally spoke. "Ash, that's not what we're talking about tonight." Ashley turned toward him. "I'm not trying to start a fight," she said. "I'm just explaining why we need to reorganize things." She turned back toward me. "And honestly, Julie," she paused, "you don't really do anything here anymore." The words landed in the room like a dropped plate. Michael looked up sharply. "Ashley," but she wasn't finished. "I mean, let's be realistic," she said. "You're basically retired. You don't work. You don't handle the bills." She gestured lightly around the kitchen. "So from a practical standpoint," then she said it, "you're kind of useless in this house." The sentence hung in the air. Lily's fork clattered against her plate. Michael rubbed his face with both hands. "Ash, what the hell?" he said quietly. Ashley looked confused by his reaction. "What, I'm not insulting her? I'm just being honest." I felt something deep inside me go very still. It wasn't the word itself that hurt the most. It was the certainty behind it. Ashley truly believed what she was saying. She believed that usefulness was measured only by income, that ownership belonged to whoever earned the most money, that age meant irrelevance. I looked at Michael. For a moment, I waited for him to say something stronger, to defend me, to remind Ashley whose house she was sitting in, but he didn't. He only shook his head slightly. "Ash, that wasn't necessary," he said weakly. Ashley sighed. I didn't mean it in a cruel way. Then she stood up and carried her plate to the sink. The conversation ended there. Dinner dissolved into uncomfortable silence. Lily quietly excused herself and went upstairs. Michael remained at the table for several minutes staring at his hands. I began clearing the dishes. Ashley turned on the faucet and started rinsing plates. The ordinary sound of running water filled the room. Finally, Michael spoke again. "Mom, don't take that personally." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I carried a stack of plates to the sink. Ashley moved aside slightly to make space. Neither of us looked at each other. "Words reveal how people think," I said quietly. Ashley shrugged. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Michael stood up quickly. "I'm going to check on Lily." He left the room. Ashley dried her hands with a paper towel. Then she said something else. Something that revealed more than she realized. "You know," she said casually, "things will feel different once the paperwork is sorted out anyway." I turned toward her slowly. "What paperwork?" Ashley hesitated for half a second. Then she smiled. "Oh, nothing complicated." She waved her hand dismissively. "Just some documents Michael and I want to discuss with you later." Then she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing alone beside the sink. For a long time, I didn't move. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. Not peaceful. Heavy. Eventually, I walked into the hallway. The staircase light was on, and there, hanging exactly where it had always been, was the framed document. Ashley had walked past it again tonight, without even glancing at it. She believed I was useless in this house. But what she didn't know yet was that my late husband had built something far more powerful than money, and the moment she tried to force those mysterious documents in front of me, that framed paper on the wall was going to become the most important thing in the entire house. After that dinner, something inside me shifted. Ashley's words didn't explode into an argument the way they might have years earlier. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse her of disrespect, and I didn't demand that Michael defend me. Instead, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Sometimes the most important information reveals itself when people believe you've stopped noticing. For the next few days, I behaved exactly the same as before. I made breakfast in the mornings, watered the garden in the afternoon, and spent time helping Lily with her homework after school. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, I was watching everything. Ashley moved around the house with the same confident rhythm she had developed over the past few months. She made phone calls in the kitchen while pacing slowly across the tile floor. She worked on her laptop at the dining table, typing emails and occasionally muttering about numbers or schedules. Michael still avoided conflict the way he always had. When Ashley spoke sharply, he became quieter. When tension rose in the room, he found reasons to leave it. And Lily, sweet Lily, remained the only person who seemed genuinely aware that something was wrong. Children feel tension long before adults admit it exists. 3 nights after that dinner, Lily knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Grandma," she whispered. I looked up from the book in my hands. "Come in, sweetheart." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" she asked. "Of course." She climbed onto the edge of the bed beside me, her expression unusually serious for an 11-year-old. "Did Mom make you sad at dinner the other night?" she asked quietly. I smiled gently. Sometimes adults say things without thinking carefully about how they sound. Lily frowned. She does that a lot lately. Her honesty made my chest tighten. "Why do you ask?" I said softly. Lily hesitated, twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt in her fingers. "I heard them talking," she said. "Talking about what?" She leaned closer to me, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Mom said you just need to sign the papers." The room suddenly felt very still. "What papers?" I asked carefully. "I don't know," Lily said. "They were in the kitchen after you went upstairs. Dad was saying something about timing, and Mom said you'd probably sign if they explained it the right way." My stomach tightened. "And what did your dad say?" Lily looked down. "He said he didn't want to upset you. That sounded like Michael. Avoid conflict first, worry about consequences later." "Did they say anything else?" I asked. Lily nodded slowly. "Mom said once the documents are done, things will finally make sense." The exact phrase Ashley had used earlier. Paperwork, documents, signing, pieces of a puzzle that were slowly beginning to fit together. I placed my hand gently on Lily's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." She looked relieved. "I just thought you should know." Then she hugged me tightly before heading back to her room. After she left, I sat quietly for a long time. Ashley wanted me to sign something. That much was clear. But what exactly, and why was she so confident I would agree? The next morning, I started looking more carefully around the house, not searching in an obvious way, just observing. When people believe they're in control, they often become careless. 2 days later, I found the first clue. Michael had left his laptop open on the dining table when he stepped outside to take a phone call. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the screen was facing directly toward me, and the document displayed on it contained words that immediately caught my attention. Property transfer authorization. My heart began beating faster. I didn't touch the laptop. I simply stood there and read what I could from a distance. The page contained legal language about ownership, changes, financial restructuring, and something about shared title arrangements. Then I heard Michael's voice outside near the patio. I walked away before he returned. That afternoon, I made a phone call. There was only one person I trusted enough to discuss something like this: Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca and I had known each other for almost 25 years. She had been Thomas's attorney for many important matters. After his death, she continued helping me with certain legal questions when necessary, but we hadn't spoken in several months. When she answered the phone, her voice sounded warm and familiar. "Julie." "It's been a while." "Yes, it has," I said. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment. "I think I need your advice." Rebecca's tone shifted immediately into professional focus. "What's going on?" I explained everything. Michael and Ashley moving in, Ashley's comments about the house, the realtor who had stopped by, the dinner conversation where Ashley called me useless. And finally, the documents Lily had overheard them discussing. Rebecca listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished speaking, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made my concern deepen. "Julie, I'm glad you called." Why, I asked. "Because what you're describing sounds very deliberate." I sat down at the kitchen table. Deliberate how Rebecca chose her words carefully. "Sometimes people present legal documents as simple family planning," she explained. "But depending on the wording, those documents can transfer control much faster than most people realize." My fingers tightened around the phone. "You think they're trying to take the house? I don't know yet," she said calmly. "But I would strongly advise you not to sign anything until we review it together." "That was already my plan." Rebecca paused again. "Julie, do you still have the file Thomas created before he passed away?" "Yes," I said. "And the framed document is still hanging where he placed it." I glanced toward the staircase wall. "Yes." Rebecca exhaled slowly. "Good." Her voice carried a note of quiet reassurance. "Then you may have more protection than Ashley realizes." Protection. That word made me feel slightly steadier. "What should I do next?" I asked. Rebecca answered without hesitation. "For now, do nothing. Nothing." "Exactly," she said. "Let them believe everything is normal." "Why? Because people reveal their intentions more clearly when they think their plan is working." I looked toward the hallway again. The framed document hung quietly on the wall exactly where Thomas had placed it years ago. "Julie," Rebecca added gently, "if Ashley is planning what I suspect she's planning, that document might become very important." I felt a strange mixture of worry and calm settle inside me. Ashley believed she was preparing to control this house, but Rebecca was right about one thing. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think they're winning. And for the first time since Ashley called me useless in my own kitchen, I began to suspect that the game she was playing might end very differently than she expected. The day after my conversation with Rebecca, the house felt strangely quiet. Not physically quiet. Ashley was moving around the kitchen preparing breakfast. Michael was rushing through emails before work, and Lily was searching for her backpack upstairs, but emotionally quiet. Like the moment before a storm when the air becomes heavy. Rebecca's advice echoed in my mind. Do nothing. At first, that sounded like the hardest thing to do. When someone begins circling something you care about, especially your home, every instinct tells you to protect it immediately, to confront them, to demand answers. But Rebecca understood something I had learned slowly over the years. The truth often reveals itself more clearly when people believe they're unobserved. So I watched. And Ashley gave me plenty to observe. 2 evenings later, she brought up the subject again. Michael had just come home from work and was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. Lily was upstairs finishing homework, and I was washing vegetables at the sink. Ashley walked into the kitchen carrying a folder. Not casually, purposefully. She placed the folder on the table beside Michael. "We should probably talk about the paperwork soon," she said. Michael looked up nervously. "Maybe later," he muttered. Ashley crossed her arms. "We've already waited long enough." Then she glanced toward me. "Julie," she said brightly, "do you have a minute?" I dried my hands with a towel and turned toward her. "Of course." Ashley opened the folder. Inside were several neatly printed documents. Legal documents. I didn't need to read them yet to recognize the format. "This is nothing complicated," Ashley said, sliding one page slightly forward. "It's just a way to simplify the future." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ashley ignored him. "You see," she continued, "situations like this can create confusion later if everything isn't organized properly." "What kind of confusion?" I asked calmly. Ashley pointed at the document. "Well, technically the house is in your name right now." That statement was technically true, but it was also incomplete. Ashley continued explaining in a tone that sounded carefully practiced. If anything unexpected happened, the transfer process could become messy. Courts probate legal fees. It's all avoidable if we handle things early. She slid another paper across the table. This would simply add Michael's name to the ownership structure now. Michael finally spoke. "Ash, maybe we should slow down." Ashley's eyes flicked toward him briefly. "We are slowing down," she replied. Then she looked back at me. "It's actually very common for families to do this," she said. "That way, everything is already arranged." Her voice carried the confident tone of someone who expected agreement, but I remembered Rebecca's advice, so instead of reacting emotionally, I leaned slightly closer to the table. "Can I ask a question?" I said. Ashley smiled. Of course. What happens if I sign these documents? Ashley answered immediately. Well, Michael would be listed as a co-owner of the property, and after that, I asked. Ashley shrugged lightly. Then the house becomes part of our long-term financial structure. Interesting. And if I don't sign? I asked. Ashley's smile stiffened just slightly. Well, it just makes things more complicated later. Michael rubbed his temples. Mom doesn't have to decide right now, he said quietly. Ashley looked irritated. Michael, we're just discussing it. Then she turned back toward me again. There's really no downside, she said reassuringly. It just protects the family. Protects the family. I folded my hands calmly on the table. I'll need time to review these, I said. Ashley hesitated. They're very straightforward. I'm sure they are, I replied gently, but I'd still like to review them carefully. Ashley forced another polite smile. Of course. She closed the folder and placed it back on the table. Just don't wait too long, she added. Timing can matter with these things. Michael stood up abruptly. I'm going to check on Lily, he said. He left the kitchen quickly. Ashley gathered the papers and followed him out of the room a few moments later, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The moment the hallway grew quiet, I reached for the folder. I opened it carefully. Rebecca had been right. Very right. The documents were written in complicated legal language, but the intention was clear enough. This wasn't simply estate planning, it was a property restructuring agreement. If I signed those papers, Michael would gain shared ownership of the house immediately. And once shared ownership existed, things could change very quickly. Refinancing, loans, forced sales, even legal disputes over occupancy rights. Ashley had presented the plan as harmless family organization, but the structure of the documents told a different story, a much faster one. That evening, I called Rebecca again. I saw the documents, I told her. What do you think she asked? They want me to add Michael as a co-owner. Rebecca sighed softly. That's exactly what I expected. Is it dangerous? I asked. Potentially very, she said, especially if Ashley is already thinking about refinancing. I leaned back in my chair. So what do I do? Rebecca's answer came immediately. Bring the documents to my office tomorrow. All right, and Julie. She added gently, bring Thomas's file as well. The trust file. Yes, and the framed certificate from the staircase wall if you can remove it safely. I glanced toward the hallway again. That paper is important, I asked. Rebecca chuckled quietly. More important than Ashley could possibly imagine. The next morning, I carefully removed the framed document from the wall. For years, it had hung there quietly. Most people assumed it was decorative, but the words printed on that page told a very specific story. A story about ownership, protection, and conditions that Ashley clearly hadn't considered. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Rebecca in her office while she studied the documents Ashley had prepared. She read each page slowly. Then she leaned back in her chair. Well, she said calmly, your husband was a very thorough man. What do you mean? I asked. Rebecca opened Thomas's legal file and turned several pages toward me. These documents Ashley wants you to sign would normally give Michael shared ownership. I nodded. But Rebecca tapped a section of Thomas's trust agreement. But according to this structure, she smiled slightly. No transfer of ownership can occur without triggering several protective clauses. What kind of clauses? Rebecca slid one page closer to me. This house is protected by a lifetime occupancy trust. My heart beat faster. What does that mean? It means, Rebecca explained, that as long as you are alive, mentally competent, and residing in the property, no one can force a transfer, sale, or restructuring without violating the trust terms. I stared at the document, and if someone tries, Rebecca closed the file gently. Then they could lose far more than they expected. At that moment, I realized something Ashley had completely misunderstood. She thought the house was a simple asset waiting to be transferred, but Thomas had never believed in simple assets. He believed in protection, and the framed document hanging on my staircase wall was only the most visible piece of a much larger shield, one Ashley had walked past every single day, without ever realizing what it meant. When I returned home from Rebecca's office that afternoon, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. The persimmon tree swayed slightly in the front yard. The porch light hung quietly above the door. From the outside, nothing had changed. but I walked through the front entrance with a completely different understanding of what was happening inside these walls. Ashley believed she was guiding events toward a predictable conclusion. Michael would convince me to sign the documents. Ownership would slowly shift, and eventually the house would become part of their financial plan. What she didn't know was that Thomas had already anticipated something very similar decades earlier. Rebecca had spent nearly 2 hours explaining every detail of the legal structure Thomas created. The house wasn't simply mine. Technically, it belonged to a protective living trust Thomas established before his death. That trust granted me something called lifetime occupancy rights. As long as I was alive and living in the house, no one could transfer ownership, refinance the property, or legally force changes to its structure. Not even Michael. But the most surprising part came later in the documents. Rebecca had pointed to a specific clause buried deep in the legal language. If any beneficiary attempts coercion, manipulation, or fraudulent transfer regarding the property, she read aloud their inheritance rights may be permanently revoked. In simple terms, Thomas had created a trap. If someone tried to force control of the house while I was still living there, they could lose everything they hoped to gain. Ashley had no idea, and judging by Michael's nervous behavior lately, I suspected he didn't fully understand it either. That evening, I walked into the kitchen where Ashley and Michael were talking quietly. They stopped when they saw me. Ashley smiled quickly. "Hi, Julie. How was your day? Busy?" I said calmly. Michael shifted slightly in his chair. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I replied. I poured a glass of water and sat down at the table. Ashley leaned forward slightly. "Did you have time to look at those documents?" There it was again. Her voice carried the same carefully measured enthusiasm. "I looked at them briefly," I said, "and I still need time." Ashley's smile tightened just a little. "They're really very straightforward." "I'm sure they are," I said gently, "but I'd still like to understand everything properly." Michael nodded quickly. "That makes sense." Ashley glanced at him with mild irritation. Then she looked back at me. "Well, just don't wait too long," she said. "The sooner everything is organized, the better for everyone." I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up and carried my glass to the sink. Ashley returned to her laptop. Michael pretended to check emails on his phone. The conversation ended, but the tension in the room lingered long after. Later that night, Lily came downstairs while I was sitting in the living room. She curled up beside me on the couch. "Grandma," she whispered. "Yes." "Are Mom and Dad mad at you?" Her question broke my heart a little. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "Sometimes adults just have complicated conversations." Lily frowned. I heard Mom talking again earlier. I felt my stomach tighten slightly. What did she say? Lily hesitated. She was talking to Aunt Stephanie on the phone, Ashley's sister, and I asked carefully. She said the house situation is taking longer than she expected. I stayed silent. Lily continued. She said once the ownership changes are done, everything will be easier. Ownership changes. Ashley had already decided the outcome. Lily leaned closer. She also said something else. "What was it?" Lily lowered her voice. She said if things don't move faster, there are other ways to solve the problem. A chill moved slowly down my spine. "What kind of ways?" I asked gently. "I don't know," Lily said, but she mentioned assisted living. The room suddenly felt colder. Assisted living. The phrase echoed in my mind like a distant alarm. Ashley wasn't just trying to change paperwork. She might be preparing to remove the one obstacle standing in the way of her plan. Me. I forced a calm smile for Lily. "Thank you for telling me." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Everything will be okay." After Lily went back upstairs, I sat alone in the living room for a long time. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, more serious. Ashley wasn't just impatient, she was escalating. The next morning confirmed it. I walked into the kitchen and found Ashley speaking quietly with Michael. They stopped when I entered. Michael looked uncomfortable. Ashley looked annoyed. "We were just talking about the paperwork again," she said quickly. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "Ash." Ashley cut him off. "We need to schedule a proper discussion with who I asked." Ashley straightened slightly. "A financial advisor." Michael looked surprised. "I thought we were waiting." Ashley ignored him. "It's just someone who can explain things clearly," she said. "That way everyone understands the benefits." Benefits. That word again. I nodded slowly. That might be helpful. Ashley seemed pleased by my response. Great, she said. I'll arrange a meeting. Michael still looked uncertain, but he didn't argue, and Ashley took his silence as agreement. Over the next few days, I watched carefully as she prepared. She printed new documents, made phone calls, scheduled appointments. Each step revealed something important. Ashley believed she was winning. She believed I was slowly becoming convinced. She believed the house would soon become part of her future. But every time she walked through the hallway, she passed the staircase wall and the framed document that had been there for years. The same document Rebecca had carefully explained to me. The same document that quietly represented Thomas's foresight. Ashley never stopped to read it, not once. And because of that single oversight, she had no idea that the plan she was building was about to collapse under its own weight. All she had to do was look up, just once. If she had taken 5 seconds to read those words on that piece of paper, she might have realized that the house she believed she was taking control of had been protected long before she ever walked through the front door. Ashley scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday evening. She announced it at breakfast 3 days earlier, sliding into the kitchen with the confident energy of someone who believed she was finally bringing everything together. I found someone who can explain everything clearly, she said, while pouring coffee into a mug. His name is Daniel Harper. He's a financial consultant who specializes in family property planning. Michael looked up from his cereal. Ash, do we really need someone outside the family for this? Ashley waved a hand dismissively. It's better when a professional explains things. It keeps everything neutral. Neutral. That word sounded very convenient. I sat quietly at the table, stirring my tea. What time is the meeting? I asked calmly. Ashley smiled as if my question confirmed her progress. Thursday at 6. He'll come here. Michael shifted in his chair. To the house. Yes, Ashley replied. It's easier if he sees the property. There it was again. Not our home, the property. Michael looked at me briefly, searching for a reaction. I gave him none. All right, he said quietly. Ashley looked satisfied. For the next 3 days, the house felt like a stage being prepared for a performance. Ashley cleaned the kitchen twice. She organized documents into neat folders. She even rearranged the dining table so that 4 chairs sat evenly spaced around it. Everything looked deliberate. Michael, meanwhile, became quieter than usual. I noticed him watching me sometimes, as if trying to guess what I was thinking, but he never asked directly. Thursday evening arrived with a cool breeze drifting through the open windows. At exactly 6 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Ashley was already standing near the front door when the doorbell rang. I'll get it, she said quickly. A tall man in his early 40s stepped inside a moment later carrying a leather briefcase. Good evening, he said politely. Ashley introduced him with a bright smile. This is Daniel Harper. He shook Michael's hand, then he turned toward me. And you must be Mrs. Nguyen. Julie is fine, I said. He nodded respectfully. Thank you for inviting me. We moved to the dining table. Ashley sat beside Michael. Daniel Harper placed his briefcase on the table and began removing documents. His manner was professional and calm. I understand the family is discussing property organization, he said. Ashley nodded eagerly. Yes, we're just trying to simplify future ownership. Daniel Harper glanced briefly at Michael. Then he looked at me. My role tonight is simply to explain the options available. He opened one of the folders. Ashley leaned forward. As we explained before, she said Julie currently holds the property title, but we believe adding Michael now would make things easier long term. Daniel Harper nodded slowly. That is one possible structure. He turned a page. In situations like this, a shared ownership arrangement can allow refinancing options, tax planning, and estate simplification. Ashley looked pleased. Exactly. Michael remained quiet. Daniel Harper continued speaking in an even tone. However, every property structure depends on the legal framework already in place. That sentence caught Ashley slightly off guard. What do you mean, she asked. Daniel Harper adjusted his glasses. Well, before making any changes, we would normally review the original ownership documents. Ashley gestured toward the folder she had prepared. We have everything right here. Daniel Harper opened the folder. He studied the documents Ashley had printed earlier. For several minutes, he read silently. Ashley watched him expectantly. Michael stared at the table. I simply waited. Finally, Daniel Harper looked up. These documents would normally create a joint ownership structure, he said. Ashley smiled. Yes, but he added carefully that assumes the property is currently held as a standard individual asset. Ashley's smile faded slightly. It is, she said. Daniel Harper looked at me. Mrs. Nguyen, may I ask something? Of course. Was the property ever placed in a trust? Ashley spoke before I could answer. No. Daniel Harper looked uncertain, because some of the language in these documents suggests that possibility. Ashley shook her head firmly. We would know if that were the case. I folded my hands calmly on the table. My husband handled the legal structure before he passed away. Daniel Harper nodded thoughtfully. In that case, he said it might be wise to confirm the current ownership arrangement before proceeding. Ashley's tone sharpened slightly. The house is in Julie's name. Daniel Harper didn't argue. Then everything should be simple to verify. He turned another page in the folder. And of course, he continued, we would also need to ensure there are no protective clauses preventing transfer. Ashley blinked. Protective clauses? Daniel Harper nodded. Yes. Some estate structures include restrictions designed to prevent forced transfers. Ashley looked impatient now. This is just a basic ownership adjustment. Daniel Harper closed the folder gently. Possibly. He looked at me again. Mrs. Nguyen, have you had these documents reviewed by an attorney? Ashley quickly answered for me. We're just discussing it tonight. Daniel Harper leaned back slightly in his chair. That's wise. Ashley frowned. What do you mean? I mean, he said calmly. Legal review is essential before signing anything involving property ownership. Michael finally spoke. That sounds reasonable. Ashley looked frustrated. But everything here is standard. Daniel Harper smiled politely. Standard documents can still create very different outcomes, depending on the existing legal structure. The room grew quiet. Ashley glanced toward me. Julie? She said slowly, you've lived here for decades. You would know if there were any unusual legal arrangements. I met her gaze calmly. My husband believed in careful planning. Ashley crossed her arms. So there is something. Daniel Harper looked interested now. Do you happen to have the original documents? I stood up slowly. Yes, I said. I believe I do. Ashley watched me carefully as I walked toward the hallway. I paused near the staircase wall. The framed document still hung exactly where Thomas had placed it years ago. I removed it gently. When I returned to the dining room, everyone's attention shifted toward the frame in my hands. Ashley frowned. What's that? I placed it carefully on the table. Daniel Harper leaned forward. Ashley glanced at the paper briefly. I've seen that thing hanging in the hallway, she said dismissively. It's just a certificate, right? Daniel Harper picked it up and began reading. His eyebrows slowly rose. Ashley watched him impatiently. What does it say? Daniel Harper looked at her. His expression had changed. This, he said carefully, is not a decorative certificate. Ashley frowned. Then what is it? Daniel Harper turned the frame slightly so she could see the heading clearly. His voice was calm. It's a certified summary of a protected living trust. The room went completely silent. Ashley stared at the paper, and for the first time since she moved into my house, she looked unsure. For several seconds after Daniel Harper spoke, no one in the room said anything. Ashley stared at the framed document as if the words printed on it had suddenly rearranged themselves into a language she didn't understand. A protected... What, she asked, finally. Daniel Harper kept his voice calm. A protected living trust. He placed the frame carefully on the dining table so everyone could see it. Ashley leaned closer. Her eyes scanned the lines quickly, but the legal terminology clearly wasn't what she expected. Michael looked confused. Wait, he said slowly. What does that mean? Daniel Harper adjusted the position of the document. This certificate summarizes the primary structure of the trust your father established, he explained, glancing briefly toward me. Ashley's expression hardened. My father-in-law, yes. Michael leaned forward. But Mom owns the house. Daniel Harper nodded. Technically, she holds the occupancy authority. But the trust itself holds the property. Ashley's voice sharpened. That's the same thing. Daniel Harper shook his head gently. Not exactly. He pointed to the second paragraph on the certificate. This trust grants Mrs. Nguyen lifetime residential rights. Michael frowned. Meaning Daniel Harper said calmly, she has the legal right to live in this home for the remainder of her life without interference. Ashley crossed her arms. That doesn't stop her from adding Michael to the ownership. Daniel Harper paused. Then he said something that made Ashley's confidence waver. Actually, it might. Ashley blinked. What do you mean, might? Daniel Harper turned the frame slightly and tapped another section of the document. This trust contains several protective clauses. Ashley's voice rose slightly. What kind of clauses? Daniel Harper read slowly. Any attempt to alter ownership structure during the lifetime occupancy period must comply with strict review conditions. Michael looked increasingly uneasy. So, what does that mean in plain English? Daniel Harper closed the folder Ashley had prepared earlier. In plain English, he said it means the house cannot simply be transferred or shared through standard paperwork. Ashley shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Daniel Harper remained calm. Your father-in-law designed this trust specifically to prevent external pressure from influencing ownership changes. Ashley leaned back in her chair. External pressure? Daniel Harper looked at her carefully, including pressure from family members. The room became quiet again. Michael rubbed his forehead. Dad never mentioned any of this. I finally spoke. Your father believed people would reveal themselves over time. Ashley's eyes flashed toward me. So you knew about this the entire time I trusted your father's planning, I replied calmly. Ashley let out a small laugh. Okay, but this still doesn't change anything. Daniel Harper raised an eyebrow. Ashley gestured toward the papers on the table. We're not forcing anything. We're just adding Michael as a co-owner. Daniel Harper folded his hands. Unfortunately, the trust may interpret that differently. Ashley frowned. How Daniel Harper opened the trust file I had brought from Rebecca's office. The pages made a soft rustling sound as he turned them. Then he stopped. Here it is. Ashley leaned forward again. What Daniel Harper read aloud. If any beneficiary attempts to manipulate pressure or engineer a transfer of property rights during the lifetime occupancy period, their inheritance eligibility may be revoked. Ashley froze. Michael's head snapped up. Revoked. Daniel. Harper nodded. Yes. Ashley's voice grew sharper. That's ridiculous. Daniel Harper kept reading. The trust author reserves the right to disqualify beneficiaries who attempt to undermine the occupant's legal protection. Michael stared at the document. So if someone tries to force Mom to transfer the house? Daniel Harper finished the sentence calmly. They could lose their claim to the property entirely. Ashley slammed her hand lightly on the table. That's not what we're doing. Daniel Harper met her gaze evenly. I'm simply explaining the clause. Ashley turned toward me. You planned this. I tilted my head slightly. My husband planned it. Ashley laughed again, but the sound carried an edge of frustration now. So the house is just locked away forever. Daniel Harper shook his head. Not forever. He pointed to another section. The trust transfers full control after Mrs. Nguyen's lifetime occupancy ends. Ashley's eyes narrowed. So eventually, Michael still inherits it. Daniel Harper nodded. That appears to be the structure. Ashley leaned back again. Then what's the problem? Daniel Harper's voice remained steady. The problem is the clause regarding coercion. Ashley's irritation turned into open annoyance. No one is coercing anyone. Michael finally spoke. Ash, maybe we should slow down. Ashley turned toward him. Slow down. We've been dealing with this for months. Michael looked exhausted, because maybe we misunderstood something. Ashley's eyes flicked back toward me. You could have explained this earlier. I looked at the framed document on the table. It's been hanging in the hallway for years. Ashley followed my gaze. Her expression tightened. That thing, Daniel Harper nodded. Yes. Ashley stared at the certificate. You're telling me that piece of paper changes everything? Daniel Harper chose his words carefully. It confirms the trust exists. Ashley exhaled sharply. Well, that's just a summary. Daniel Harper nodded. Correct. Then he closed the trust file gently, but the full document is far more detailed. Ashley's confidence faltered slightly. What else does it say? Daniel Harper glanced at me before answering. It includes specific enforcement procedures if someone attempts to bypass the trust structure. Michael looked uneasy again. What kind of procedures? Daniel Harper spoke calmly. Legal review, trustee oversight, and potential beneficiary removal. Ashley stared at him. Beneficiary removal. Daniel Harper nodded. In extreme cases, the silence in the room felt heavier now. Ashley's earlier confidence had faded into something sharper, frustration. Michael looked between us. "Mom, I didn't know any of this. I believe you," I said gently. Ashley stood up abruptly. "This whole thing is ridiculous." Daniel Harper remained seated. Mrs. Nguyen's husband clearly designed the trust to prevent misunderstandings. Ashley looked directly at me. "You've been sitting there quietly this whole time while we tried to solve a problem that doesn't even exist." I met her gaze calmly. "The problem exists." Ashley's eyes narrowed. "What problem?" I looked around the room slowly. "The problem is believing a house belongs to someone who hasn't earned the right to respect it." Ashley's jaw tightened. Michael stared at the table again. Daniel Harper closed his briefcase. "I think tonight's discussion has clarified the legal situation," he said. Ashley crossed her arms. "So what now?" Daniel Harper stood. "Now everyone has the information they need." He glanced once more at the framed document. "And sometimes information changes plans." Ashley didn't respond, but for the first time since she moved into my home, the certainty she carried with her every day was gone, and the house suddenly felt very different again. Not controlled, not threatened, protected. After Daniel Harper finished explaining the trust structure, the energy in the room shifted in a way that was almost physical. The confident atmosphere Ashley had created around the dining table began to unravel. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Ashley remained standing for a moment, staring at the framed certificate on the table as if it had personally betrayed her. Michael sat quietly absorbing what he had just heard, and Daniel Harper calmly packed the documents back into his briefcase. "I think it's best if everyone takes time to review the full trust file with proper legal guidance," he said. Ashley finally spoke. "So basically, nothing changes." Daniel Harper paused before answering. "That depends on how you define change." Ashley frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the property structure is already defined," he explained. Ashley let out a frustrated breath. "This is ridiculous." Michael looked up. "Ash," but she kept going. "We've been trying to plan responsibly. That's all." Daniel Harper nodded politely. "Planning is always wise, but this trust arrangement seems designed to block normal family decisions." I spoke calmly. "My husband believed in protecting stability." Ashley turned toward me sharply. "So you're just going to hide behind paperwork?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied her face carefully. For months, she had moved through my home with the quiet certainty of someone slowly taking control. Now that certainty was cracking. "Thomas didn't hide anything," I said finally. "The document has been hanging in the hallway for years." Ashley's eyes flicked toward the staircase. "That piece of paper isn't exactly obvious." Daniel Harper gave a small, thoughtful smile. "It's actually quite obvious if someone reads it." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I honestly thought it was just some kind of commemorative certificate." "That's a common assumption," Daniel Harper replied. Ashley sat down again, but her posture was rigid. "So let me understand this," she said. "You're telling us the house can't be transferred?" Daniel Harper corrected her gently. "I'm saying it cannot be transferred under pressure during Mrs. Nguyen's lifetime occupancy." Ashley's frustration grew more visible. "No one is pressuring anyone." Michael spoke quietly. "Ash, maybe we should just stop pushing this." Ashley turned toward him. "Stop pushing. We've been trying to solve a financial problem." Michael rubbed his face. "And maybe this isn't the solution." Ashley stared at him. "So what is?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched across the room. Then Daniel Harper cleared his throat. "Before we continue," he said, "there's something else you should understand about trust structures like this." Ashley looked annoyed. "What now?" Daniel Harper glanced at the trust file again. "Your father-in-law included a secondary oversight layer." Michael frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means there is a trustee responsible for enforcing the trust." Ashley leaned forward slightly. "Who?" Daniel Harper looked at me. "Mrs. Nguyen probably knows the answer." I nodded. "Robert Hayes." Michael blinked. "The accountant?" "Yes." Ashley looked confused. "That old guy?" Daniel Harper nodded. "Mr. Hayes has authority to review any action involving the property." Ashley shook her head in disbelief. "This just keeps getting more complicated." Daniel Harper remained calm. "It's actually quite simple." Ashley crossed her arms. "Then explain it simply." Daniel Harper leaned slightly forward. Your father-in-law anticipated that situations might arise where someone would attempt to influence ownership decisions. Ashley rolled her eyes. That's a bit paranoid. Daniel Harper continued speaking as if she hadn't interrupted. So he created a trust structure where the occupant, Mrs. Nguyen, remains protected. Michael looked thoughtful. Protected how Daniel Harper turned another page. Any attempt to transfer ownership requires trustee review. Ashley scoffed. Fine, then we talk to the trustee. Daniel Harper's tone stayed even. That is possible. Ashley leaned back. Good. But Daniel Harper wasn't finished. However, the trust also includes an enforcement clause. Ashley's patience was clearly running out. You already mentioned that. Yes, Daniel Harper said. But there's an additional step. Michael looked up. What step? Daniel Harper closed the file slowly. If the trustee determines that a beneficiary attempted to manipulate the occupant into transferring property, Ashley interrupted. That's not happening, Daniel Harper continued calmly. The trustee may initiate a formal review of that beneficiary's eligibility. Michael stared at him. Eligibility for what? Daniel Harper answered quietly. For inheritance. Ashley laughed sharply. This is unbelievable. Michael looked at the trust file again. So if someone pressures Mom to sign something, Daniel Harper nodded. The trustee can investigate. Ashley leaned forward again, frustration turning into anger. We are not pressuring anyone. Daniel Harper met her gaze. That determination would not be made by you. Ashley opened her mouth to respond, then stopped, because in that moment she realized something important. The situation was no longer under her control. The conversation moved outside her influence. And perhaps, most unsettling of all, other people were now involved. Ashley stood abruptly. This whole meeting is pointless. Daniel Harper didn't argue. Sometimes clarity feels uncomfortable. Ashley grabbed the folder she had prepared earlier. So what happens now? Daniel Harper closed his briefcase. Now you proceed carefully. Ashley's voice sharpened. Or what? Daniel Harper looked directly at her. Or you risk triggering the exact protections your father-in-law designed. The room went silent again. Michael slowly leaned back in his chair. Ashley stared at the trust file. For months she had believed the house was simply waiting to be transferred, waiting to become part of her financial plans. But now the reality was clear. The house wasn't waiting. It was guarded, carefully, legally, and intentionally. Daniel Harper stood and picked up his briefcase. I think it would be wise for everyone to pause here, he said. Ashley didn't respond. Michael walked him to the front door. When they returned a few minutes later, Ashley was still standing near the dining table. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the staircase wall where the framed certificate had hung for years. I walked past that thing every day, she muttered. I didn't answer, because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones that were always visible. Ashley finally looked back at me. You knew this would stop us. I shook my head gently. No. She frowned. Then what? My husband knew someone might try. Ashley said nothing, and for the first time since she moved into my house, she looked like someone who had just realized the game she thought she was winning, and had been carefully designed long before she ever started playing. The house felt different after that meeting, not because anything physical had changed. The same furniture sat in the same places, the same soft creaking of the staircase echoed in the evenings, the same persimmon tree swayed outside the living room window. But the balance of power inside those walls had shifted. Ashley felt it, Michael felt it, and I felt it most of all. For months, Ashley had moved through the house with the quiet certainty of someone slowly claiming ownership. Every suggestion, every rearranged cabinet, every comment about renovations had carried the same underlying assumption. That time was on her side. Now time had turned against her. The next morning was unusually quiet. Ashley didn't come downstairs early the way she normally did. When she finally entered the kitchen around 8, she looked tired, her hair tied back loosely as if she hadn't slept well. Michael sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. Neither of them spoke at first. I was making tea when Ashley finally broke the silence. So she said flatly, I waited. What happens now? She asked. Michael looked up slowly. What do you mean? Ashley gestured toward the hallway. That trust thing. Michael sighed. It's not a thing. It's a legal structure. Ashley rolled her eyes. Fine, the legal structure. She turned toward me. You could still change it if you wanted to. I stirred my tea calmly. Why would I? Ashley crossed her arms. Because we're family. Michael looked uncomfortable again. But Ashley continued. You know we're struggling financially. I know, I said quietly, and this house can help solve that. There it was. The truth she had been circling for months. Michael finally spoke. Ash, maybe we should just drop it. Ashley turned sharply toward him. Drop it, yes. Ashley laughed bitterly. So we just ignore the fact that your mother is sitting on a huge asset while we're drowning in debt. The word asset echoed through the kitchen. Not home, not family house, asset. Michael's voice grew firmer. Ashley, stop. She stared at him in disbelief. You're taking her side. Michael looked exhausted. There aren't sides, Ashley scoffed. That's easy for you to say. Then she turned toward me again. You've been letting us struggle while you sit here protected by paperwork. Her voice carried anger now, but I didn't react. Instead, I asked a simple question. Ashley, when you moved into this house, what did you think it meant? She frowned. What kind of question is that? Just answer. Ashley shrugged. I thought we were family helping each other. And what did helping each other mean to you? Her eyes narrowed slightly. It meant sharing resources. I nodded slowly. But respect is also a resource. Ashley's jaw tightened. Are you saying I've been disrespectful? Michael looked down at the table. Ashley noticed. Oh, please, she said. Everyone's acting like I committed some terrible crime. Michael finally raised his voice slightly. You called Mom useless. Ashley waved her hand dismissively. That was one comment. One comment that said a lot, Michael replied. Ashley looked stunned by his response. So now I'm the villain. Michael didn't answer. The silence stretched. Then Ashley stood abruptly and walked into the living room. Michael stayed in the kitchen with me. He rubbed his face slowly. I didn't know about the trust, he said quietly. I believe you. He looked toward the hallway where the framed certificate usually hung. Dad really planned all of this, yes. Michael sighed. He always thought 10 steps ahead. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that surprised me. Ashley thought the house would eventually become ours. I nodded. I know. Michael looked ashamed. I guess I started thinking that way too. The honesty in his voice softened something inside me. But damage had already been done. A house doesn't become yours just because time passes, I said gently. Michael nodded slowly. I understand that now. In the living room, Ashley was pacing back and forth. Her frustration had nowhere to go. Finally, she walked back into the kitchen. So that's it, she demanded. Michael looked up. What do you mean you're just accepting this? Michael stood. Ashley, it's not ours. Ashley laughed bitterly. It could have been. Michael shook his head. No, it couldn't. Ashley looked at me again. You're really going to sit there and pretend you didn't know we were struggling? I knew. And you didn't help. I met her gaze calmly. I opened my home. Ashley's voice rose. You let us move in, yes, but you still control everything. Michael spoke quietly. Ashley, stop. But she was too angry now. This whole thing is ridiculous, she said. She pointed toward the hallway. One piece of paper, and suddenly we're the bad guys. I followed her gaze toward the staircase. That piece of paper represents your father-in-law's life work. Ashley scoffed. It represents paranoia. Michael shook his head. No, it represents foresight. Ashley turned toward him again. You've changed your mind fast. Michael looked tired. I'm just seeing things clearly now. Ashley stared at him. Then she looked at me. You're not as innocent as you pretend to be. I didn't respond, because sometimes silence speaks louder than defense. Ashley grabbed her car keys from the counter. I need some air, she said. She walked out the front door without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. Michael leaned against the kitchen counter. I don't know how things got this bad, he said quietly. I placed my hand gently on the table. Sometimes people convince themselves they deserve something. Michael nodded slowly, and when they realize they don't, they feel betrayed. I finished. Michael looked toward the staircase again. The framed document was still missing from the wall where it had hung for years, but the truth it represented remained stronger than ever. And for the first time since Ashley walked into my house, believing it would eventually belong to her. The illusion had finally shattered. Ashley didn't come home that night until after midnight. I was still awake in the living room when I heard the front door open quietly. The soft click of the lock echoed through the hallway, followed by the slow sound of footsteps. She stopped when she saw me sitting on the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The lamp beside me cast a warm circle of light across the room, but Ashley remained half in shadow near the doorway. "You're still up," she said. "Yes." Ashley slipped off her shoes and walked slowly into the living room. She looked different than she had earlier that evening. The sharp anger was gone. In its place was something heavier: exhaustion. "I drove around for hours," she said quietly. I didn't respond. Ashley sat in the armchair across from me. "You probably think I'm a terrible person," she said after a long pause. "I think you're frustrated," I replied. She laughed softly. "That's a polite way to put it." The silence between us stretched again. Outside, the wind rustled the persimmon tree in the front yard. Finally, Ashley spoke again. "You know what the worst part is," she said. "I waited. I really believed we had a plan." Her voice carried a strange mixture of bitterness and disappointment. "When Michael told me your house was paid off, I thought this could solve everything I asked gently. Our debt," she said. "Our mortgage problems, the pressure." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Do you know what it feels like to watch everything you built start falling apart?" "Yes," I said quietly. Ashley looked up surprised by my answer. "I lost my husband," I continued, "and the future I thought we were going to have together." Ashley didn't reply. The room remained still. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said eventually, "but you did." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "I know." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. I thought if we could just shift things a little, move some paperwork, it would work out for everyone. I shook my head gently. "Ownership doesn't work that way." Ashley looked toward the staircase hallway. "Your husband really thought this far ahead, yes, even about family, especially about family." Ashley stared at the floor for several seconds. Then she said something that surprised me. "I called my sister tonight." "What did she say?" "She told me I pushed too hard." I didn't comment. Ashley let out a slow breath. She said when someone lets you live in their house, you don't start measuring the walls. A faint smile touched my lips. "That sounds like good advice." Ashley laughed softly. "I wish I'd heard it 6 months ago." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked slightly. Lily was probably awake. Children always sense when something important is happening. Ashley noticed the sound, too. "She's probably worried about us," she said quietly. "Children don't like tension in their homes." Ashley looked around the living room slowly. "Your home," she corrected. The words hung between us. For the first time since she had moved in, Ashley sounded like a guest instead of an owner. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you and Michael." Ashley rubbed her hands together nervously. "Are you going to make us leave?" I considered the question carefully. "Do you think you can live here with respect?" Ashley didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," she admitted. "That honesty matters." Ashley leaned back in the chair. "You're calmer than I expected." "Why? Because if someone tried to take my house, she said I'd probably throw them out immediately." I smiled faintly. Age teaches patience. Ashley studied my face. "You're stronger than I realized." I shrugged slightly. Strength isn't always loud. A few minutes later, Michael came downstairs. He looked surprised to see us talking quietly. "Everything okay?" he asked. Ashley turned toward him. "We were just talking." Michael sat on the couch beside me. "Ashley," he said carefully, "we need to figure out what we're going to do." Ashley nodded slowly. "I know." Michael looked at me. "I don't want this house to be a place of conflict." "Neither do I." Ashley looked between us. "So, what are the options?" Michael spoke first. "We could move out." Ashley didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly. "That might be best." Michael looked surprised. "You're okay with that?" Ashley sighed. "I think staying here after everything that happened might make things worse." Her voice carried a new humility. "And honestly, I don't think I deserve to keep acting like this place belongs to me." Michael reached for her hand. "I'm sorry things got so messy." Ashley squeezed his fingers gently. "Me too." The tension that had filled the house for months seemed to loosen slightly in that moment. Not completely, but enough to breathe again. "I'd still like Lily to visit you," Ashley said quietly. "Of course," I replied. "She loves being here." Ashley smiled faintly. "She talks about your cooking all the time." Michael chuckled softly. That's because Mom feeds her like she's training for a marathon. We all laughed quietly. It was the first genuine laughter the house had heard in weeks. Ashley stood up slowly. I think I'm going to try to sleep. She paused near the staircase. Her eyes drifted to the empty spot on the wall where the framed document usually hung. That paper really changed everything, she said. I shook my head gently. No. She frowned. What do you mean the paper didn't change anything I explained? It just revealed what was already true. Ashley nodded slowly. Then she went upstairs. Michael remained beside me on the couch. Dad really protected you, he said quietly. Yes. Michael looked thoughtful. I think he protected the whole family. I glanced toward the staircase hallway. Thomas had always believed that the strongest structures were the ones built quietly long before anyone realized they would be needed. And now, years later, his foresight had done exactly what he intended. It protected not just a house, but the dignity of the person who lived inside it. The house felt peaceful again about 3 weeks later. Peace didn't return all at once. It came slowly in small, quiet moments that gradually replaced the tension that had filled the rooms for months. The first change was silence. Not the uncomfortable silence that had followed arguments and unspoken resentment, but the natural quiet of a home that had returned to its original rhythm. Ashley and Michael moved into a small apartment across town 2 weeks after our late-night conversation in the living room. It wasn't luxurious. Michael described it as temporary while we rebuild things, but the difference in his voice was noticeable. For the first time in a long while, he sounded grounded again. Ashley had insisted on helping pack their belongings herself. She worked quickly but quietly, moving through the house with far less certainty than before. The measuring tape she once carried around had disappeared. The renovation conversations had stopped. Instead, she focused on practical things: boxes, furniture, Lily's school supplies. On their last day in the house, she paused in the hallway beside the staircase. The framed document had been returned to its place on the wall after the meeting with Daniel Harper. Ashley stood there for several seconds, reading it carefully. This time she actually took the time to understand the words. A protected living trust, she murmured. Then she looked at me. Your husband was very smart. Yes, I said softly. Ashley nodded. I wish I'd respected that sooner. There was no bitterness in her voice anymore, just quiet acceptance. Michael carried the final box toward the door while Lily hugged me tightly in the living room. Grandma, I'm still coming over on weekends, right? She asked. Of course, I said. That's not changing. She smiled brightly. Ashley watched us for a moment before speaking. She talks about your house like it's her second home. I smiled gently. That's because it is. Ashley hesitated before adding something else. Thank you for letting us stay here. The sentence sounded simple, but the meaning behind it was much heavier than it would have been months earlier. You are always welcome here, I replied. Ashley nodded slowly. Yes. I just forgot how to act like a guest. Michael stepped forward then. Mom. He said quietly, I'm sorry. I looked at him carefully. For what? For letting things get that far. I studied his face. The boy I had raised was still there somewhere beneath the exhaustion and poor decisions of the past year. Life becomes complicated sometimes, I said. Michael nodded. But respect shouldn't. He was right about that. They left shortly afterward. The house grew quiet again. At first, the silence felt strange. After months of tension, I had almost forgotten what the house sounded like when nothing was wrong. No whispered arguments in the kitchen, no careful conversations about documents and ownership, just the gentle creaking of the wooden floors and the wind moving through the trees outside. One evening, about a week after they moved out, I sat on the front porch watching the sunset. The sky above the neighborhood glowed with soft orange and pink light. The persimmon tree Thomas planted decades ago swayed gently in the breeze. I thought about the night Ashley called me useless in my own kitchen. At the time, the words had stung. Not because they were true, but because they revealed something painful about how easily people forget the foundations that support them. A house doesn't just appear. It's built, brick by brick, decision by decision, year after year. Thomas understood that better than anyone. His foresight hadn't been about controlling the future. It had been about protecting the dignity of the present. And in the end, that protection had done something unexpected. It hadn't destroyed my family. It had forced them to confront themselves. Michael visited often after they moved, sometimes alone, sometimes with Lily. Ashley came occasionally too. The tension between us never fully disappeared, but something new had taken its place. Respect. Not perfect respect, but real enough to keep peace. One afternoon, Lily asked me a question while we were baking cookies together in the kitchen. "Grandma," she said, "why did Grandpa put that paper on the wall?" I thought about the answer for a moment, because sometimes the things that protect us are the things people ignore the most. Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Like secrets, not secrets," I said. "Wisdom." Later that evening, after Lily and Michael left, I walked through the hallway again. The framed document hung quietly on the staircase wall, exactly where Thomas had placed it years earlier. Visitors still assumed it was decorative, just another certificate, but I knew what it really represented. Not power, not control, something much simpler. The right to stand in your own home without anyone making you feel small. And as I turned off the hallway light that night, I realized something important. Ashley hadn't missed that document because it was hidden. She missed it because she never stopped long enough to truly see the house she had walked into. The memories, the history, the quiet strength that had been built there long before she arrived. And in the end, that quiet strength turned out to be the most valuable thing in the entire house. Not the property, not the money, but the dignity that came from knowing exactly who you are and never letting anyone convince you that you're useless in your own life. If there is one lesson I learned from everything that happened in my home, it's this: kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Many people believe strength is loud. They imagine it looks like shouting, fighting, or demanding respect. But sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm while the truth slowly reveals itself. When Ashley called me useless in my own house, she wasn't just insulting me. She was revealing the way she measured people's worth. To her, usefulness meant money control and ownership, but life has a way of teaching deeper lessons. A home is not defined by who wants it the most. It's defined by the people who built it, protected it, and respected it. My husband understood that long before I did. That's why he created something stronger than a simple deed or bank account. He created a structure that protected dignity. And in the end, that protection didn't just save the house. It saved our family from making a mistake we could never take back. Maybe you've experienced something similar in your life. Maybe someone underestimated you. Maybe someone assumed your silence meant weakness. If so, remember this: patience and wisdom are powerful forms of strength. You don't always have to fight loudly to stand your ground. Sometimes the truth will do that work for you. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had someone mistake your kindness for weakness? And I'm always curious where people are watching from. What country or city are you in right now? What time is it where you are? Your stories matter too, and if you enjoy thoughtful storytelling like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Because sometimes, the quietest moments in life turn out to hold the most powerful truths.